Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, everybody. David G., alcoholic addict. Grateful for a recovery date in Alcoholics Anonymous of August 8th, 1994. Grateful member of SA as well. Sober there since October 1st of 2019. Really grateful to be here with you guys tonight. Glad to see everybody that's come out. Good to see my friend Fred. Long time no see, brother. Good to see you here tonight. So we've been traveling for about 28 weeks now, or maybe a little more, through this book, and we have made it all the way to the wives. We've looked at the problem. We've looked at the solution. Many of us thought that drugs, alcohol, lust, acting out, whatever that may be, that's what the problem was. We was quite sure. We were convinced. But as we dug into the book, we began to see that self manifested in various ways is what had defeated us. When we took the third step, we said, God, we offer ourselves to thee to build with us and do with us as thy will. Relieve us of the bondage of self, not of drugs, not of alcohol, not of sex, lust, acting out, of self. And so all the way through the first 3 or 4 chapters of the book, we looked at the insane ideas, beliefs, concepts, attitudes, and prejudice that prevent us and block us from the power of the loving God. Therefore, we fall into darkness. We go to sleep. Even though we're not acting out, even though we're not drinking and drugging, we're still discontent, irritable, and very restless. And this happens to us for a long period of time until at some point we're not able to take it and something definitely happens. So as we worked through the process, showed exactly how to work each step as it was laid out. We came through the chapter 7, which was entirely devoted to step 12. Most people stop right there and don't go any further. That's been my experience through the years in Alcoholics Anonymous. Other than reading it on my own or going to a meeting where they might have been reading it, I never really took a solid look at the instructions as they're laid out here. I'm convinced that these 4 chapters in the back are the lost chapters in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm convinced that these are other areas of life after the spiritual experience has taken place. And unless I've had a spiritual awakening up to this point, it's really hard for me to get into this chapter and really even understand what it's saying. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous in 1994, I did not have a wife. Therefore, I didn't feel like I need to read the chapter of the wives. I didn't have a job, so I didn't feel like I need to read the chapter of the employers. I definitely had no vision, so there was no point in a vision. The only vision I had was to stay sober. So when we look at these chapters, the wives, the employer, the family afterward, it's these are all areas of life after the spiritual experience has taken place. And so we're going to jump in on chapter 8 tonight, and that's where we're going to begin our study. Page 104 in my book. If you have a 4th edition, it'll be 104 in yours. And we've been looking at self all this time, how it's defeated us. It's not going to be any different here. Only we're going to look out at how it is in them and how self in me and self in them connect and cause a whole lot of chaos. I'm sober. Everything should be better now, but everything's going to hell. I can't understand why. Well, today I know why. And the book is going to be pretty specific in that tonight. So we're going to start there, chapter, and it says to the wives, and it has an asterisk there beside it. So let's go ahead and jump to the very bottom of the page and get that out of the way. Written in 1939 when there were few women in AA. This chapter assumes that the alcoholic in the home is likely to be the husband, but many of our suggestions given here may be adapted to help the person who lives with a woman alcoholic, whether she's still drinking or is recovering in AA. A further source of help is noted on page 121, and we'll be taking a look at that when we get there. So if we go back to the top of the page, it says, with few exceptions, our book thus far has spoken of men. But what we have said applies quite as much to women. Boy, I was glad to read that sentence, I promise you. Our activities in behalf of women who drink or act out, I've come to learn, are on the increase. There's every evidence that women regain their health as readily as men, but there is a condition, and here it is, if they try our suggestions. Now, if you'll hold your place with me right there and you'll travel back over to page 33 of the book, we're going to take a look at the bottom paragraph of that page, and it says this. To be gravely effective, one does not necessarily have to drink a long time nor take the quantities some of us have. This is particularly true of women. Potential female alcoholics, or in some of our cases here, sexaholics, often turn into the real thing, and they're going to be on recall in a few years. In a few years. I mean, that's how fast this comes on people. And so what a great promise back over here on page 104, that there is every evidence that women regain their health as readily as men if they try our suggestions. Many of these women are on this call tonight. I know them. They have good sobriety and good recovery. They're recovering sexaholics and they're recovering alcoholics. And that's a good thing. It really is. So, but for every man who drinks, others are involved. The wife who trembles in fear, boy, there is one of the soldiers of self right there. I want to pay attention to that. Anytime somebody trembles in fear, especially me, I need to know where that fear is coming from. And as we've looked at its source as we went through this, we've seen that selfish and self-centeredness, that's the root of our troubles, driven by 100 forms of fear. So this is one of those forms. For every man who drinks, others involved, a wife who trembles in fear. That was definitely my case. I'm a very explosive man whenever I drink, and a lot of times even when I'm sober. And so any kind of outburst like that brings a lot of fear. It says the mother, father, and father who see their son wasting away. I've had that experience in my life. I can remember my son about 4 years ago wasting away on heroin and alcohol. And there was just no shutting it down. Our other son, a few years before that, was wasting away from opioids. And it's just a devastating thing to watch. There's a lot of fear involved in that. There just really is. And I can remember talking to an old-time member in Al-Anon, was a lady, very humble, beautiful, elderly lady. I just love her to pieces. And she'd sent a lot of alcoholics my way to work with through the years. So when that time came for me, of course, I went to her. And I can remember one day laying on the couch, and I was tore up and I was praying. And finally I got mad at God. You know how we do. Hell, he ain't answering quick enough and all this. So I talked to her and I said, you know, this is what's going on. And she said, David, I want you to pray. And I said, I'm not going to pray anymore. I'm just not. I'm tired. And she said, why? I said, because he's not answering the prayer. You know, I'm many years sober by now. I know better than this, you know. And she said, why don't you quit asking him for everything? Why don't you try thanking him for a change? Why don't you thank him that that boy's still alive? Why don't you thank him that he does have some kind of hope for recovery because of that? Why don't you thank God that he's given you another day of sanity? You're not drinking over this. Why don't you thank him instead of always asking him for something? And I thought, well, hell, that's too simple. But I started doing that, and after a short time, it ran out. I can remember calling her back, and I said, the insanity's back. She said, did that work? And I said, yes. She said, hell, try it again. Wow, I never thought of that. So my prayer for my son and my sons became, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. And in a short time, he ended up in detox, and, you know, he had a few struggles there along the way, but today he's got over 4 years of recovery, and the other one's got about 6. So very, very good thing here. Book says, among us are wives, relatives, and friends. Look at this beautiful promise, whom the problem has been solved. Remember back on page 17 of the book, if you go back there just for a second, in that very first paragraph right there, it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous know 1,000 men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. And really, most people would say at that point, you've found the solution, the answer in Alcoholics Anonymous. But for me, that's only the beginning. That's a long way from the emotional recovery that I'm seeking here. So the book says, as well as some who has not yet found a happy solution. But we want the wives of AA and SA to address the wives of members who drank or act out too much. What they say will apply to nearly everyone bound by the ties of blood and affection to the alcoholic or the sexaholic. I'm convinced if you are a wife who has recovered from this, or an S-Anon, or an Al-Anon, it's not only your duty, it's your obligation to go back and help the ones that haven't yet found a way. I'm very big on that with the people that I sponsor, and that's just the way it has to be. The book says, as wives of Alcoholics Anonymous, we'd like you to feel that we understand this. Perhaps if you can, we want to analyze mistakes we've made, and we want to leave you with the feeling that no situation is too difficult, no unhappiness too great to overcome. My God, what a feeling. When my feelings used to be exactly the opposite of that. All I felt was distress and no hope. And so we who have traveled the rocky road, there's no mistake about that. Or we have traveled the rocky road. There's no mistake about that. We've had long rendezvous with hurt, pride. Now look at these soldiers of self. Look at all of these symptoms. Pride, frustration, self-pity, misunderstanding, and fear. Anytime I'm experiencing any one of these in my recovery today, I need to remember their source. See, these are just the symptoms. These are not the source. The source is self. And we're going to see that here, and we're going to see that how it comes up in our loved ones. Now, these are not pleasant companions. Anybody on here that suffered with that will agree. We've been driven to model in sympathy, to bitter resentment. Some of us have veered from extreme to extreme, ever hoping that one day our loved ones would be themselves once more. Our loyalty and desire that our husbands hold their head up and be like other men have begotten all sorts of predicaments. We've been unselfish and self-sacrificing. Now, just about any woman would tell you that. And whenever I'm moving through this process, or I haven't even begun to do it yet, I would tell you that was absolutely true. But what's fixing to come up before we get to the end of this paragraph is really what I begin to see today. And if the woman does not take on a program of recovery, the same as the man, this stuff right here continues to stay around. Let's look at it. We've been unselfish, self-sacrificing. We have told innumerable lies. There's the dishonesty. Remember, that's one of the soldiers. To protect our pride, boy, that's more near the truth than anything that could be told. And our husband's reputation, but I believe it was the former more than the latter. We have prayed and we have begged. We see that that's bargaining. Anytime that I try to do that, I'm trying to bargain for something. Get him well, do this for me, do that for me, any of this. I'm bargaining whenever I try to beg. We've been patient. Look at this one. We have struck out viciously. There's the anger. Notice how anger always comes in when self is trying to defend self. Look at this one. We have run away. There's fear. Oh my God, let me get away from this, at least just for a little while. We have been hysterical. Look at the drama. Oh my God, we're the best at bringing in all that kind of drama, right? We have been terror-stricken. There's fear again. We have sought sympathy. Look at the self-pity there. If you read underneath these sentences, you really begin to see self, and you really begin to see how it's as much in them as it is in us. And when you got those two colliding together, there's no happiness, there's no peace, and there's no contentment. I don't care if we're sober or we're not. Sober is not well for a guy like me. Obviously, I have to have it in order to even begin this journey. That's far from what I'm looking for. That is definitely the effect, not the cause. So page 62 in the book. And if you want to flip over there with me for just a second, we'll take a look at that. Very last paragraph says, this is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Now that is just as much for her as it is for me. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama life, God's going to be the director. Not David, not her, not anybody. There's one ultimate authority, the loving God as he may express himself in this group conscience. So here we see on page 105 all the symptoms of untreated alcoholism, sexaholism, from somebody who doesn't even drink or doesn't even act out. First time I ever went to an Al-Anon meeting, their steps read, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. I said, how the hell is that possible? You don't even drink. And she said, no, but it's the behavior from you that causes us so much hell. But what we've come to find out as we've worked through these steps, that it's really not you, it's the illness. And that's what we begin to see here. It's not only the illness in me, but it's the illness in them. So, yes, they're absolutely powerless over alcohol or sexaholism. Our homes have begotten many battlegrounds, many evenings. In the morning, we have kissed and made up. Our friends have counseled, chucking them in, and we have done so with finality, only to be back in a little while, hoping, always hoping. There it is again. I'm ready to bargain this time. If you do this, I'm going to stay, and if you don't, I'm going to go. You've got a choice to make. It's this. Our men have sworn great solemn oaths. I can remember doing that so many times and mean it with all my heart. And then I go back and I drink again, or I'd act out again and just feel like the lowest piece of crap that ever walked, not realizing that I didn't have any power to make that oath to begin with, for one thing. And the other thing is that it wasn't me. It was self. And so we see this. If you remember Bill Wilson signed the family Bible, he said, I'd made many sweet promises. And so this is nothing new. That they were through drinking forever. And look what it said. We have believed them when no one else could or would. So they believe the lie just as much as we do. Then in days, weeks, or months, a fresh outburst with lust or relapse over and over and over. And it's just, it never ends. One of the things with the wife in the family that I see, especially when the alcoholic or the sexaholic comes in and sobers up and no one else does anything other than just go to your meetings and get better and come back so that we can live our life. Really, you've got a man trying to recover here in my experience, but you've got the rest of the family who doesn't feel like they need to in any way. And what happens is I begin to get angry and I get resentful at that. And the next thing you know, here I am, I'm going again, and I can't figure out why. Hell, I was going to meetings. I was doing what my sponsor said. But I really didn't realize that resentment was the number one offender. And man, it strikes in the home almost more than anywhere. Ask anybody that's been around here for a long time. That even works a pretty good program. If within the home, they still don't suffer from resentments and fears just about every day. The ones that tell me, no, I don't ever do that. Well, you got a different sponsor than I do, because, there's times here whenever I don't, I still get into that. Not as often, but yeah, absolutely. So our book says we seldom had friends at our home, never knowing how or when the men of the house would appear. See how they're trying to manage and control. Look at that. Never had friends at the house, never knowing. That's not their job. I mean, I can understand they don't want to be shamed. They don't want to be embarrassed. But to manage and control, that's self. That's what it wants to do. So if I'm not doing it, then they're doing it. So we're all sick. We can make few social engagements. We came to live almost alone. There's that selfishness. When we were invited out, our husbands sneaked so many drinks that they spoiled the occasion. If, on the other hand, they took nothing, their self-pity made them killjoys. And I'm sure it brought a lot of embarrassment to them as well. There was never financial security. Positions were always in jeopardy or gone. An armored car could not have brought the pay envelopes home. The checking account melted like snow in June. Now, I can promise you, if that's going on under my roof, and my wife doesn't have a working knowledge of that somehow, some way, I'm not the only one to blame here. Now, I am for sure because of the behavior that I'm demonstrating. But I promise you today there would be a stop put to that. There just would. So there needs to be accountability on all ends. Sometimes there were other women. How heartbreaking was this discovery? How cruel to be told that they understood our men as we did not. Now, that's not a very good idea for sexaholics, especially one like me. I was married to my very first wife, and I can remember one time saying something along these very lines to her. Now, this was a lady who liked to fight just about as much as I did, and she didn't fight just to beat you up. She fought to hurt you whenever she fought. It took a while to get her to that, but it seemed like I could do it pretty often. And so I had been having an affair with a neighbor, and it got found out, like it always does. And so we decided to go down to the bar and have a few drinks that evening just to try to reconnect. And you know how us drunks are. We're always up to a plan. And so I can remember there, and of course the conversation is going to turn to that. Of course it is. And so I'm drinking beer and I'm drinking whiskey, and I can remember her really getting on to me, and I didn't even want it brought up. I was trying to get away from the conversation, and she didn't. And I can remember looking over at her and saying, you know what? It's a proven fact that if you don't take care of your homework, somebody else will. And that's just the way it is. And I can remember in those days they had glass pitchers in the bar, and she was pouring a beer with that pitcher, and she just backhanded me with that pitcher, and it knocked me out of that chair. And man, I was humiliated in front of all those people. I got up and was ready just to stomp her. And so all the bouncers, they drugged me out and threw me out. And so I went home, waited on her. I drank another pint of whiskey. I was waiting on her to come home. Thought, boy, I'm going to wear her out when she gets here. And so she finally shows up, and I'm drunk, and she comes in and she says, David, I'm just so sorry for all that had happened. I was wrong in what I said, and this was different. She said, why don't we just hug and make up? We'll go to bed. And I remember walking in to give her a hug, and she threw a knee and hit me in the gut and just grabbed me and just pitched me out this plate glass window. And I mean, it just broke, and I landed out there in the cold, and she called the police and said, he broke the window out. He's coming here. He's beating on me and these kids. You need to come get him. They come haul me to jail. It was like, wow. And so I'm sitting in jail, and I can remember the guys saying, man, you look rough. I mean, you look rough. And of course, you know, my pride, I'm like, well, you ought to see the other guy. You think I look bad, you ought to see what he looks like, you know. But this is the type of woman that was, you know, untreated. And anytime that you brought anger and violence, she brought it back. And it was just a crazy relationship. I used to hear Keith D. I would listen to him speak, and he would say that his wife and he, you know, they hid guns and knives under their pillows, and they said it was not for intruders outside of the house. It was for them, you know. And so very crazy. Our book says the bill collector, the sheriffs, the angry taxi drivers, the policemen, the bums, the pals, and even the ladies they sometimes brought home. Our husband's thought, there's that key word, that thinking, there's that thought system that we suffer from. We're so inhospitable, joy killer, nag, wet blanket. And I used to add a few other words to that, but I won't here. And it says that's what they said. The next day they would be themselves again, and we would forgive and forget. Now there's that denial that anything ever happened, that this needed to be addressed or this needed to be looked at and taken care of. It's just, okay, if you're going to behave yourself, then let's go on with life. And that's what we would do. And it wouldn't be very long till I'd be right back in it again. It says we have tried to hold the love of our children for their father. Now we have told small tots that father was sick. I see some revenge in that. I really do. We've tried to hold the love of our children, you know. There were times whenever she held the love of them from me at different times too, to try to prove a point. And that would sometimes work, sometimes it wouldn't. But the book says that was much nearer the truth, and we realized they struck the children. There's that anger. There's where I lash out emotionally. Kicked out the door panels. I can remember, you know, just tearing up furniture, just knocking every window out of the house we lived in one time. Smashed treasured crockery and ripped out the keys of the piano. In the midst of such pandemonium, they may have rushed out threatening to live with the other woman forever. And there's that revenge. I will show you. This is what I will do. And this is just insanity. I mean, it's plain insanity whenever I'm under that. And I have to be careful even today, because even though I'm not drinking or using or acting out or any of that crap, I can still find myself wanting to plan some revenge somehow, some way if I get mad. It's like a lot of time it'll be silent score. I'll just wait it out forever. And it's like, it is insane. So in desperation, we have even got tied ourselves, the drunk to end all drunks. But here's the unexpected result of that kind of behavior. Our husband seemed to like it. I loved it when she would drink with me. She just couldn't drink with me for very long. Now, this is something quite different whenever it comes to acting out, because that's not a good thing. So This is the family member, this is to the family member what the doctor's opinion is to us about that phenomenon of craving. It's almost like we crave that insanity sometimes, and it's just nuts. So perhaps at this point we got a divorce and took the children home to father and mother. Then we were severely criticized by our husband's parents for desertion. Usually we did not leave. To stay around in any of that kind of insanity has to be someone who's very sick. We stayed on and on. We finally sought employments ourselves as destitution faced us and our families. We've seen that in Bill's story when Lois had went to work at a department store and she would come home exhausted to find him drunk. And that's nothing new to alcoholics and addicts for sure. We began to ask medical advice as the sprees got closer together. There has to be a lot of fear in that type of thinking. The alarming physical and mental symptoms, the deepening pall of remorse, there's that guilt. Look what it says, depression and inferiority. Anytime that I'm suffering from that, it's insane. But it says it settled down on our loved ones, and these things terrified and they distracted us as animals on a treadmill. We have patiently and wearily climbed, falling back in exhaustion after each futile effort to reach solid ground. There comes a time whenever we have to do something different. Most of us had entered the final stage with its commitment to health resorts, sanitariums, hospitals, and jails. That's the same thing we've seen back in More About Alcoholism. But I need to remember that anytime I go there, really what I'm trying to do is to heal mentally and physically. Until I begin to heal spiritually, none of that's going to matter anyway, because I can go away from there. I can get a little bit of health back. I can get a little bit of sanity back. But at some point, my behavior is going to return. I'm going to act out again, and we're going to go again and again. So until I really begin to deal with the spiritual malady brought on by a human condition called self, then my chances of recovery are slim to none. Sometimes there were screaming delirium and insanity. Death was often near. I was placed in a detox. One of the detoxes I was placed in, one of the many, was with my own tribe in a little south town just southeast of here a ways. And I can remember being there as a young man, and I decided, after a day or two, it was time for me to get out of there. And they were going to let me go the next day, but they wanted me to go over to this room, and they wanted me to look at the men that were in that room. And so I put that off all day, and by the end of the day, I was needing something to do, and I could hear the screams and the moans down there. And in those days, there really wasn't private rooms, and they didn't have walls. They just had curtains that drew back and forth. And I can remember walking to the edge of that door and looking in there. And there were a lot of men that were dying from alcoholism. Their livers had swollen. It was over their belt. They were just dying, yellow in the face and in the eyes from hepatitis. And it was terrible. But I can remember self telling me, you and I will never be that way. If it ever gets that bad, we'll quit a long time before it ever gets to there. And I'm sure those men probably thought the same thing. But as it said right there, they're screaming delirium, insanity, and death was often near. And that was many times. And man, I even found myself in that place right there in 2019 when I was laying in the floor in here on the east end of our home. 25 years sober, no drugs, no alcohol, but I'd been discovered for acting out over a long period of years. And I was in a place to where I was absolutely scared to death. I felt that I had picked up an STD of sorts that I wasn't going to be able to get rid of. Scared to death. And I can remember just the insanity, the screams within, just that death that I suffered there. And today I'm grateful for that, because what happened is I was dying to self that whole time, and I didn't realize that's what was going on at the time. I just wanted some immediate relief, and I had no idea I was about to come into a way of living that was more beautiful than anything I'd ever experienced in all those years. So our book says under these conditions, we naturally made mistakes. Of course we would, but that's all they are. They're mistakes. They're lessons. They're not life sentences. But my mind wants to take a mistake and beat me to death and hold it over me for years and tell me there is no hope and there is no solution. Thank God that's a lie. We get a chance to address a whole lot of that in our inventory process in what is known as the fourth column. So some of these rose out of ignorance of alcoholism. And if you remember back on page 20 of the book, if you hold your place there for just a second and take a run with me back over there, it's going to talk about the ignorance of that. And so second to the last paragraph on that page says, these are commonplace observations on drinkers, which we hear all the time. We even hear it inside the rooms. But the back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours. So what I came to understand is not everybody that's sitting in Alcoholics Anonymous is an alcoholic, and not everybody that's sitting in Narcotics Anonymous is an addict, and not everybody that comes to SA is a sexaholic. And I've come to learn that because a lot of people will come in, make a few meetings, run through the step in 2 or 3 hours and never return to it. I think that's a wonderful thing. If you can live a better life, so be it. But that's not what happened to me and many of the people that I work with. Such stuff like that is very dangerous for people like us. So, I see that ignorance of alcoholism or sexaholism, that's not always a good thing. Sometimes we sense dimly that we were dealing with sick men. It's kind of weird how sanity vaguely comes in during times, but it'll go away just about as quick as it showed up. So sometimes we sense dimly that we were dealing with sick men. Have we fully understood the nature of the alcoholic illness? Well, how could they? We couldn't understand it, so how could they? And you remember that Bill talked about this. In the forewords, he talked about the grave nature of alcoholism. And this is what was explained to him by Dr. Silkworth. And then when Ebby come back with the message from Roland Hazard and Dr. Carl Jung, the allergy, the obsession, who knows about that before we come into recovery? And not many know about it for a long time after they come here. I've worked with people that have been around the fellowship for years and years and years, and you put them into the doctor's opinion, they're absolutely amazed at what they see. You take them through the first 3 chapters of the book, and they're just absolutely blown away by the mental obsession. And so, had we fully understood the nature of the alcoholic illness, we might have behaved differently. I guarantee you we would have. There's no doubt. How could men who love their wives and children be so, here's our key word, unthinking, so callous, so cruel? Here's what I've come to learn through this process. That is not me. I am directed by a system of thought that is called self. I take actions based on those thoughts, but I'm not the one who directed those thoughts. I'm absolutely accountable for every action that I've ever taken. I guarantee you, I'm not responsible for the thoughts that came to me. I had no idea that they were there. I didn't know what their source was. I just thought I was a worthless, no good person who had been damaged as a child. I was never going to have any relief. And I just believed all of this crap. So the second step is so powerful. That's not about coming to believe in God. That's about coming to believe in the insane ideas that keep us trapped and bondaged in self. What a wonderful thing to break free of that. I mean, it changed my whole life. So there could be no love in such persons. Look at these 2 words. We thought. They were governed by that same thought system, which for most of us, by the grace of God, turned out not to be true. And just as we were being convinced of their heartlessness, they would surprise us with fresh resolves and new attention. For a while, they would be their old sweet selves, only to dash the new structure of affection to pieces once more. Man, there's that, that self-remorse. That's just, Asked why they commenced to drink again, they would reply with some silly excuse or none. We don't really have any idea, or I don't know about you. I'm speaking from my experience. We don't have any idea that the self is going to set up an obsession to the mind, which is going to place a thought that overcrowds all other thoughts. And I'm not going to be able to get out from under that thought without taking action. I'm just not going to be able to. And I don't want to do that. I never one time woke up in the morning and thought, you know what, I want to hurt my wife today. I want to trash a whole group. I want to just kill everything that I've ever worked for in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't think about any of that. All I thought about was gratification for self. And a lot of times it didn't have anything to do with sex at all. It had a lot to do with the ego, who I am, who I think I am. I want to go speak here and go speak there. And I remember my wife telling me not too long ago, the difference today is you're not promoting yourself. People are asking you because they're attracted to what you have to say because of the light that is within you. And that's absolutely the truth now. It doesn't really matter to me whether I'm asked or not, and I'm asked a lot. So asked why they commenced to drink again, they would reply with some silly excuse or none. It was so baffling, so heartbreaking. Could we have been so mistaken about the men we married? There again, it's not the men you married. It's not the women we married. That's not who we are. It's who we become based on a narrative given to us by a thought system that we call self. We look at this as beliefs and concepts and ideas and prejudice, and these are false. They send thoughts my way. I believe it's true. I take action on it. I bring destruction to people. Until that is overcome through this process, I will never recover. I can get sober at best. I'll never recover emotionally. And for me, that's what I've learned in 2019. Well, about 2020. I was about a year in to SA whenever this experience came over me. And it just absolutely blew me away. When drinking, they were strangers. Sometimes they were so inaccessible that it seemed as though a great wall had been built around them. That's what self does. It isolates me. It puts a wall around me. It makes me very mean, very angry, very selfish, very dishonest. And this wall comes up around me, and there's hell to ever break it down by anybody, let alone my wife. And even if they did not love their families, which is not true, it's not true at all. How could they be so blind about themselves? Well, hell, how could they not be? Take the word them off of self and take the S off the end of that and leave the word self, and you've got the nature of the problem here. What had become of their judgment? It wasn't my judgment. It was somebody else directing that, something else directing that. What had become of their common sense and their willpower? Didn't have any. Why could they not see that drink meant ruin to them? I can't see that. If I could see that, I would probably do something about that. Why was it that when these dangers were pointed out, that they agreed and then they got drunk again immediately? Because anytime I take action based on that thought, I don't care if it's drinking, drugging, I don't care if it's lust and sexual acting out, I don't care what it is. Anytime I take action on a thought, I'm going to produce a reality. I just am. So for me, it boils down to coming through this process as outlined in the book, having a transformation of being and character, moving into the light, and beginning to walk a new man. I need to see the emotional hangups and principles of the inventory that tells me I'm worthless, I'm no good, I'm damaged, I'm fat, I don't have enough hair, I'm not smart enough, good looking enough, any of this crap anymore. And if I don't deal with that in step 4, guess where it's coming to visit me at? Up here after I work the steps. And I'm probably going to take action on that and stay emotionally sick the whole time. And then I'm going to swear up and down the program doesn't work that well because I've already worked all the steps. Why am I still suffering from this? In 2019, thank God I found a man who understood this book and understood self in such a way that he drugged that out of me, that poison out of my system. And it was a fight all the way. I fought it the whole time. But I tell you, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me because today I've recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. I have emotional recovery. I have a good relationship with my wife. I have a pretty good relationship with my coworkers. I still go up and down with them every now and again. But, you know, when I see someone that is acting a fool, I don't really see who they are. I see the condition of who they become based on a narrative that was given to them by self. And so this is very powerful information. It just is. We'll finish up reading through this chapter as much as we can next week, and we'll go on to the end of it. And there's a lot of good information here. If you've never really took time to prayerfully study the book in this way, I encourage you to do so. There's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot. It's life-changing. So, Ashley, thank you for wearing 2 hats tonight. Thank you for your service. And it's always good to be here with you folks. Thanks.
This concludes David's share on tonight's chapter, but we encourage you to keep listening as he answers questions from the audience and shares additional experience, strength, and hope.
I remember when you were taking me through this work, you know, you mentioned to me, you pointed out to me that we can be sober with this behavior. Could you, you know, we don't have to be an active addiction to have these character traits. And I know it's to the wives. And you also mentioned that, you know, it's almost contagious. They take on some of the same behaviors. Could you expound on that? As the active addict, could you expound on that a little bit? Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Always good to see you, brother. Appreciate your service. Looking forward to our call in the morning. I think we read it here tonight. I think that we see the dishonesty. I think that we see the self-centeredness, the bargaining. I think we see all of those things. You know, my experience with this is they are doing it for my better good. You know, it's like, this is what I want for you and us, you know. And of course, you know, I believe that's true somewhat, but, you know, I think inactive addiction, those are the same behaviors that I do. I'm dishonest, I'm resentful, I'm shameful, I'm fearful. And just about everything that we read here tonight, whenever they are untreated in that area, is the same thing. So it has been my experience that unless the wife does something to try to recover, or the husband, whatever the case may be, the relationship really, it has a very hard time of ever being successful. Not always, but I just know that it has to be God-centered, or in my experience at least, it's doomed to failure. So anyway, thank you, brother.
David, you said at the top of the paragraph, and even if they did not love their families, how could they be so blind about themselves? So you said to add or subtract some words and some letters. Can you repeat that?
I can. Good to hear from you, Ken. You know, the word themself. Anytime I see the word self, ourself, myself, themself, yourself, whatever it may be, I want to disassociate anything to do with me from that, because I am not the self. I am not my thoughts. So if you take the word them away from that, then that's the culprit of what the whole problem is, in my experience. And this is what the book has been telling us from day one. It's good to hear from you, brother.
Would you differentiate for me the concept of ego and self as you use it here, please?
Thank you, Susie. Always good to see you, and it's really good to hear from you. I don't see a whole lot of difference in that other than the terminology of it. And, you know, I see that the symptoms are the same. It's the thoughts, the ideas, the beliefs, the concepts, the attitudes, the prejudice, all that stuff. A lot of it, you know, from childhood trauma and different things that I've grown up with. And so really, as far as ego and the self, I don't see a whole lot of difference in that other than the terminology of it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for this reading today. Yeah, I'm so grateful because as a sexaholic, how I learned I was a sexaholic was I discovered my husband was a sexaholic, and I begged and pleaded and manipulated and coerced and pressured him to get help. And I had a religious mentor because that was the solution, religion. And I begged her to help him. And she helped him for about 3 years. And during that process, she saw that I was very unreasonable. And she turned to me one day and said, "I think you're an addict." And she said, "I think you're just like him." And so in my pursuit of trying to save my husband, that's when I was described as a sexaholic myself. Through this journey, discovered my son as a sexaholic. And so I had to get into S-Anon. Thank God for that program. And so that I could be in a state of just loving my family just as they are. I don't have to save them because they're in higher power's hands. And that's a step 2 issue. Higher power's got them. I don't need to worry about them. I just need to love them just as they are. So I'm so grateful for this. And, you know, just a promise I received 2 days ago. My husband blames me for his addiction. And so he's wanted nothing to do with me, but I've been nothing but loving towards him. And it's the first time he came as a surprise visit and spent the weekend with me. And I'm just so happy. And that's a promise from working these steps. So thank you so much. And I'll pass.
I really love going through these later chapters. As you know, you think you and I just did some work on that. And I was thinking about a little bit of the contrast between the alcoholic and the sexaholic. This thing on the, where's the page? Page 106. In desperation, we have even gotten tight ourselves. The drunk to end all drunks. The unexpected result was that our husbands seemed to like it. And I know that in the sexaholism area, My wife went along with several things with me that were actually objectionable to her, just to try and possibly somehow keep everything at home, like to control and enjoy it. And after a while, we'd go through certain experiments, and she would say, I can't stand this. I can't do this. And, the funny thing is that I was relieved, because honestly, my sexaholism was primarily a solitary affair. And I didn't want her in my space. What in the world are you looking at pornography for with me? That's just me and these models. And, it's really is a trap that no human power can get out of. And I've really appreciated your bringing to light this business, that this is all coming from self, to look at the source behind all of this. Man, relieve me of I liked how you opened up tonight. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. So this has been a great meeting for me. I just thought I'd pass that along. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Laura, for a wonderful share that you did there. I've learned that love addiction can be sometimes as damaging as sex addiction itself, and there is help for that. Thank God. I knew nothing of that for a long, long time, like I do today. But man, what a wonderful thing you shared there. So thank you, and Jason, you as well, man. What an outlook on that. That isolation, that affair of isolation. Not wanting anybody in that space. My God, I can relate to that so much. And this is just powerful stuff that we look at. We have to heal here. We just have to. We're going to look at the employers. Some of us spend 8 to 10 hours to 12 hours a day there if we're not retired. So I need to know how to practice these principles there with my wife. I'm with her a lot. I need to know that. And, the family afterward, this group of people, all the groups of people that I have in recovery, those are all family. And so, it's these chapters are so important. I'm grateful that the group decided to go on through the rest of the chapters, looking at it in this way. So it's a great privilege for me, and to hear shares like, you and Susie and the others have done here tonight. It's amazing. So thank you, everybody.
That same paragraph, that is where it tells me that, where was my judgment, my common sense, my willpower? Where was it? I knew better than the way I was behaving. And it is such a relief to consider that my self isn't me. That the self, the ego, the part of me that's had the obsession triggered that leads to these dishonorable actions, that isn't me, or the real me, or the sober me. That's just a huge shame eradicator for me. So I really appreciate that piece tonight. That's very helpful. Thank you.
I just think it's wonderful that when we can begin to see that that's not who we are. Thank God for that today, because for so many years I didn't know that. I thought, I was sorry, I was no good, I was this. And of course my behaviors, my actions were that stuff for sure. But when I found out what the source of those were, then I knew that I wasn't just taking, drinking, drugging, and acting out. It goes so much deeper than that. If that's the problem, I just need not do that stuff, and there shouldn't be any more problem. But every time I stop that stuff, if problems begin to occur, then I'm going to have to look a little deeper. So thank you, Susie, for a beautiful share.
One quick final thought. I am not my disease. Thanks.